And so building a fair trade future is something that we're all really thinking about at the moment. And I think it's important for us to really sit down and think about where we see ourselves moving into the future. What I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to be recording this, so if you don't want to be on camera, say you've got a pile of ironing behind you or you want to buy into Paul, by all means switch your camera off, because this is going to be going on the Fairtrade Yorkshire website, and the people who weren't able to join us tonight are going to be able to view it later. I'll ask you all to mute yourselves. I think I've already done that and almost everybody's done it, so that's fantastic. And the first thing we're going to be doing is, if you want to switch yourselves to gallery view from speaker view and have a look at your chat box. And what I want us to all do is, in the chat box, select it so that everyone in the meeting can see what you're writing. And I want you to put one word in there. So everybody who's in Yorkshire, I want you to just write Yorkshire. Everybody who's in other parts of the UK, so England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. If you're in Northern Ireland, you're allowed to have 2 words because you're special. So if you're in one of those places, just write that word. And if you're in the rest of Europe or the rest of the world, if you just write the country that you're in, that would be great. It's just going to give us a chance to have a look and see who's from where and how many diverse and different people we have that are joining us tonight for the Fairtrade Yorkshire Conference. Absolutely brilliant. I'm seeing loads of really good places. Marike, hello Marike from the Dominican Republic. Brilliant to see. And just one final thing before we start. If everybody's done with telling us where you're from, don't overthink this, but just write down what your favourite fair trade product is. So it could be something like flowers or chocolate, or it could be something really specific. If you absolutely love Tony's chocolate only, milk chocolate with caramel and sea salt, put that down. Just what I want to see is a whole big variety of all of the amazing products that you love that are fair trade. Brilliant. Everyone's loving chocolate. Fantastic. So what we're looking at here, we're seeing lots of different people from lots of different places. And the one thing that we have in common is that we love fair trade. And lots of us love chocolate, and some of us love coffee and tea and lots of other things, but all of us love fair trade. And the late great Jo Cox, late of this parish of Yorkshire, she said that we have more in common than that which divides us. And I think that's so relevant to what we're doing. It's about connecting people. It's about making sure that everybody comes together with a single aim, and our aim is making fair trade work for everybody and building a fair trade future. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Erinch. So what you probably want to do is put yourselves on speaker view so you can see him. And Erinch, unmute yourself and off you go.
Wonderful. I think I've got permission to share my screen, do I?
Hopefully, yes.
Let me see. Sorry guys, this is the inevitable. Here we are, share screen. So wonderful to be with you all. Someone let me know if they can't see my screen, but this is my presentation. Just to warn you all, I'm currently on paternity leave, so I might be a bit rusty. I've just had sort of we just had our first child recently, my wife and I, and I've been doing night shift as she's really struggling to go to sleep over the night. So a little sleep deprived, but also very happy and joyful. So that's my current situation. But I work for the World Fair Trade Organization. I'm the chief executive. We are a global community and verifier of those 100% fair trade enterprises. So it's different to the commodity certifier, the Fair Trade Foundation and others. We've been around since 1989. Most of the pioneers of the fair trade movement created the World Fair Trade Organization back in the late 80s, and it has since evolved and grown and spread to more than 76 countries around the world. That's a bit of a snapshot of what we look like currently. About 1 million livelihoods are connected to these social enterprises that fully practice fair trade. So it's about the fact that they have embraced it in their business model, in their manufacturing, in not only their sourcing of raw materials and ingredients, but in everything they are as a business. And it sort of transcends everything from food to garments to homewares to gifts to everything that you can think of that can be made fair trade from around the world, and also encompasses networks of retailers as well as importers, distributors like Shared Earth or Traidcraft PLC. They're all part of the World Fair Trade Organization, as well as organizations that make things, whether it's chocolate or it's garments around the world. So it's a real mix of all those enterprises and organizations that are 100% committed to fair trade in their entire business model. At the centerpiece of who we are and what we do is the 10 principles of fair trade. Hopefully none of this is foreign or unfamiliar to a group of fair trade activists and campaigners like yourselves. It's at the heart of, I think, why we all love fair trade. It's what all the different fair trade systems around the world try to embrace, whether it's the Fair Trade Foundation or the World Fair Trade Organization or Fair for Life or SPP or any of the others. It's something that binds our global community and our movement together. But those are the 10 principles, and they do evolve. This is a living thing, these 10 principles. In fact, just recently, well, not that recently now, but the most recent time we all came together as a community was in Peru just over a year ago, where we voted actually to update the 10th principle on respecting the environment. Work's currently being played out to look at the details of exactly what that will look like. But they are constantly evolving as people embrace new ideas, new challenges. And hopefully this presentation will make sense to you guys about the direction of travel, I think, of the global fair trade movement. Just a quick word on COVID-19, because it is a very significant part of our reality at the moment. I mean, it all hit us in ways that has shaken enterprises, shaken global trade and production across the world. You can imagine that the kind of enterprises I'm talking about, whether it's someone working with a cooperative in a slum in Mumbai, or with refugees in Tanzania, or with a group of economically marginalized villages in Peru, that they were all impacted. There has been drastic reduction in orders as global trade has been slashed across most of the global fair trade universe, and obviously the broader economic world as well. But what we found was there was a real increase in support from those mission-led enterprises, from those fair trade enterprises that are 100% committed to fair trade. What we found was 91% of those sorts of enterprises provided additional flexibility at a time when the mainstream business world was slashing orders, demanding lower prices, and really putting producers and manufacturers in developing countries in a very hard position, as they were in a very desperate position. The very opposite happened within the fair trade world, and that's something that I think we're all proud of as a global community, that there was solidarity that came together. On the right is a campaign we ran around the world in the months after the first COVID-19 crisis hit, called Stay Home, Live Fair, where there was a huge increase in interest in the web shops of fair trade enterprises, in ordering and in support to those fair trade products around the world. So let's take a little bit of a helicopter view. What I'm going to do is zoom out a bit about who we are as a community, I think, as a global community across the broader fair trade world, not just the World Fair Trade Organization, but the broader fair trade universe. And then also have a look at some of the bigger challenges that I think we're facing. And there's a reason why I titled this keynote address, Building the New Economy, because I think that is the great challenge ahead of us as a movement. That is a great challenge ahead of us as as humanity, that there is something intrinsically broken with the current economy. And I'm going to give a few sort of ideas and frameworks around that, and some inspiration about why I think the fair trade model and the fair trade community is creating some of the most innovative and necessary models to address those issues. So, I mean, at our heart, I think everybody would probably agree that we are a vision. We're a vision of the way the world should work, of the way trade should work, the way businesses should operate, the way people should be treated, the dignity that should be at the heart of the lives of everybody around the world. And beyond that, we're also, as WFTO, I can certainly speak for us, our community, we aspire to be and practice being a voice for producers. Those people who make the things, whether it's a basket or it's a food product or it's a garment, it doesn't really matter. The people who are making things in the global trading system typically have the least voice, have got the least power, and it's about saying, okay, let's flip it on its head. Let's say the people who are normally most marginalized, most desperate, least able to shape the reality of their lives, let's put them at the heart of what we do. And I think that's sort of the centerpiece of the identity of the fair trade movement and of the WFTO community of those social enterprises. And as I said, we're also a community of social entrepreneurs, whether it's Manos do Uruguay in the top left. It's an enterprise that's been around since the 1960s in Uruguay that connects a network of cooperatives that are in places in Uruguay that regular businesses wouldn't bother investing in. I mean, if you were trying to make things at the cheapest cost, the most highest efficiency, you probably would go to places where there's a cheap operational model. There are other economic incentives. But this is an enterprise that said, we're going to build an enterprise that supports these people regardless. We're going to put them first at the heart of what we do. And those 12 cooperatives came together, built a business, and that's owned by that business. And the people who decide the roles, the functions, and the outcomes are the women who are in the cooperative, who then own the entire brand. And that enterprise is now selling garment products around the world. It's selling in high street shops in New York, in Paris, as well as online and web shops, and everything it generates goes back to the workers, especially when it's sold through its own brand. But also as supplies to other brands. You've got Johnny Joseph on the bottom left, Creative Handicrafts, another women worker-owned factory in Mumbai, which is again existing to benefit the producers that are making the stuff. You know, so it's people, social entrepreneurs, or on the right, Fernandez and Colombia, all businesses that have said that's a center, that's our starting point. It's not a sideshow. It's not on the margins of what we do. Let's try to have something benefit while we also do regular businesses. No, we start our business around this mission, and then we take the next steps and make this a viable and thriving enterprise. But as you know, we're more than that. We're not just businesses. We're not just a voice for producers. We're not just a vision of a new economy, but we're also a movement. We're a movement that is trying to raise the voice of ordinary citizens everywhere. Whether it's the Fair Trade Towns movement, whether it's World Fair Trade Day marches, such as the one in Kathmandu last year, whether it's the Korean organizations that are currently coming up around the world, or the marches in New York, which is in the top left, around the Fair Trade Tartan. Everywhere people are marching, raising their voice as consumers. And I think that unique blend of the fair trade movement, of bringing together the businesses, bringing together the voice of producers, the vision of the economy, and the citizens who have a voice, it's that becomes the cocktail that I think really starts shaping the reality of people's lives. Just a few words on how the different systems within the fair trade world operate and work, because I just want to, and I know a lot of people are probably raising their eyebrows at the Kit Kat fair trade mark there, which is an outdated photo that I deliberately kept in there, Joanna, because I think it sort of signifies some of the differences within the different systems. But there's a wonderful commodity certifier that says for any brand, that may or may not be a fair trade brand, may or may not be a fair trade business, they can buy some of their commodities on fair trade terms, and they could take a step towards fair trade. On the right are the enterprises that have to, by definition, have every ingredient, every production facility, every aspect of who they are built around the concept of fair trade. And that's the model that we work on. Obviously, it's a smaller slice of the global pie because it is the one that requires the entirety of the business in everything they do, in all of its aspects of production, trade, and supply chain to embrace fair trade. But that's the centerpiece of what we're trying to promote as a model that tries to also disrupt what's possible beyond saying multinational companies can have some products in some places with some ingredients as fair trade to we can have an alternative to those multinational companies that are built around the concept of fair trade, that is built around the concept of distributing power and value differently within a global economy. And I think that's the big idea of the fair trade movement that we're trying to promote. But these are big words, these are big claims. So how do we verify it to say, well, this enterprise exists for the purpose of fair trade, it exists for the purpose of benefiting economically marginalized people at the bottom of their supply chains, and exists to sort of implement the 10 principles of fair trade. When we look at the 10 principles, I think they split off into 3 categories. One is around the mission and structure. So what we do is we assess whether a business in its governing documents, in its constitution or its bylaws, truly says that this exists for the purpose of benefiting marginalized producers. Also, whether the majority of their profits are going to that. And that's a bar, that's a test that most current mainstream companies could never meet. They could never go to the share market and say, well, we're going to put majority of our profits into a social mission. We're going to share it with our farmers. We're going to share it with our workers. We're going to invest it into social innovation. We're going to put it into projects that create a more equal world. All of those answers would not be tolerated by a share market and by most owners of mainstream companies. But the ones that are able to go on that journey, they're the ones that are able to be part of the World Fair Trade Organization. We also check the trading practices. So how are they making the payments? Are they making long-term commitments to their suppliers? Are they making it possible for the people in their supply chains to live dignified lives? And lastly, we look at the actual conditions on the ground, the human rights conditions in particular, whether it's child rights, labor rights, etc., women's empowerment, and make sure that those are implemented. So it's a triangulation of why a business exists, how it behaves in its trading practices, and then the impact it has on the ground that allows us to have a bit of a 360 view of, is this a people and planet first business? And if so, then they could come in and we verify, they get audited every 4 years, they get peer reviewed in between as well, and they do self-assessment. So there's a little bit of a process that goes on to continually check that that's the case. But that's the model that we work with. And I think as a result, it means that we're somewhere in between 2 kind of evolving universes. I'm not sure how many of those labels and logos make sense to people, but there's a bit of a proliferation on both sides. There's a whole bunch of organizations that are saying, well, we're here to certify specific aspects of a supply chain. It might be one particular factory. It might be some specific ingredients in a product, or it might be specific supply chains. There's lots of those that are tools that any business can go to and say, okay, we're going to use that to verify a specific claim we want to make about ourselves in relation to our supply chain. On the other side, we're seeing this huge proliferation of claims around the purpose of business, the mission of business, whether it's B Corps or social enterprise or social business or fourth sector initiative, all these sorts of terms that are now starting to bubble under, saying, well, it's not just about a specific product or ingredient, it's about the entirety of the business. There's an identity aspect to this that's being assessed by these new up and coming certifications and systems that are rising up. I think we're a bit of a hybrid of the two, because we ask both. You have to be incredibly mission-led to be part of the World Fair Trade Organization and own and use the product label, which you can see there, the World Fair Trade Organization Guaranteed Fair Trade Mark. You have to be part of that sort. You have to be a business that exists for that mission. But at the other end, you also have to have your supply chain checked to make sure those conditions and those outcomes are there as well. So it's a little bit of a hybrid of the two that I think we're sitting in between as a WFTO community. Now I'm going to take a really, really big helicopter, view of our planet and who we are, where we live, how we survive. This is, I'm sure some of you have heard of this concept called donut economics. For those who haven't, a quick explainer is We live on a planet with finite resources. There's a planetary ceiling. We cannot stretch our planet beyond the specific carrying capacity. That's everything from climate change and ozone layer depletion to, chemical pollution and fresh water and land conversion, biodiversity, all these aspects that, if we keep having a harmful economic footprint, that eats away at our ability to live sustainably on a planet that we all rely on. But at the same time, we can't shrink our economic activity below a specific floor, because we need economic activity for food, for water, for jobs, livelihoods, etc., for health, energy, all these things that we need for thriving humans to live dignified lives. We also need that economic activity. So we need to live somewhere between the planetary ceiling and the social foundation that we have, which forms the shape of a donut. And at the moment, unfortunately, what we have is, the picture is this, where we are overshooting our budget for the planetary ceiling and the ecological ceiling, and we are under-delivering on the social foundation. So you think about that for a second. We are overusing the planet's resources, but still not spreading the benefits of that enough broadly. We've got 800 million hungry people still in the world. We've got spiraling inequality. We've got spiraling sort of low coverage of healthcare. We've got people who don't have access to energy and electricity and clean water. So for one reason or another, even though we have enough food on the planet, even though we have enough wealth and economic prosperity, we don't spread that in an equitable way so that everyone benefits. So I think what this points us towards is to say that if we are going to have an ecological footprint, if economic activity is going to have an impact on the climate, on our water, on land, etc., on biodiversity, then we better be maximizing the social impact it has. We better be making sure that the most amount of people possible are earning a livelihood and are getting a dignified livelihood. And I think that's where fair trade comes into the picture. Because for any given product, what we have is a group of enterprises that exist to make the most social benefit possible. And I've sort of divided the world into two. It's a massive simplification here, as you can sort of imagine. But essentially, I've divided into two of saying, okay, well, we've got the mainstream economy on the left, much, much bigger than the representation there. This is not the scale. But we've got this huge amount of enterprises that exist to say, we will only do the right thing if we make more money from it, if consumers reward us from it. We will do fair trade if on a product where we make enough profit to justify the investment, to justify the effort. And the minute we don't, we'll drop it, as we saw recently with some brands. So those are enterprises that are designed, they're behaving the way they're designed to behave, which is to make decisions that are the most profitable possible, always, constantly. And that's a design feature, and whichever CEO you have, you're probably going to have similar outcomes in those organizations. I worked for one of those organizations many years ago. I've tried to reform them from outside, and there are limits to what's possible. There are wonderful people doing their best, but there are limits to what's possible. But I think on the right is a collection of alternative, new age enterprises that are liberated from that straitjacket of maximizing profit, because they need to be commercially viable, they need to be profitable, but they're not making every decision to say, what's the thing that reduces my cost the most? What's the thing that increases my margin the most? They're balancing things. They're saying, we need to make enough profit to survive, but sometimes I'll do the thing that is less profitable than the alternative because I'll do more social good. And I'll remain committed to my producers. I'll remain committed to my community. And you'll notice there are logos and enterprises that are not in the WFTO community. I'm not saying this is exclusive to our model, because there's I think a whole broader range of enterprise models coming up around this. In the UK, for instance, John Lewis, which is a worker-owned enterprise model, lots of shortcomings and supply chain, lots of other aspects, but it's not making every decision to maximize profits for shareholders. It's based on a different model. There are other major cooperatives like Muller in India, which has got millions of people that are co-owners of its enterprise. So a real broad range of enterprise that I think are challenging it. And I think we, as the fair trade enterprise part of the fair trade movement, are part of that experiment on what would business look like. Not long ago, we did a wonderful study with a whole host of our friends, including Tom Wills, who's going to be on this panel shortly with me, from Traidcraft Exchange, but also Stockholm Environment Institute, University of York, and the University of Cambridge, to look at deeply into this experiment of alternative enterprises that's been going on in the fair trade movement, of saying, what do they tell us? Well, 4 things jumped out. One is that for 92% of these organizations, these enterprises, they put all of their profits back into their social mission. So imagine yourself as a manager in that enterprise. You don't have shareholders saying, give me a dividend check, every year, and make sure that dividend check grows every year. Your pressure is do the most social benefit possible. And that means that you're liberated to put even your profits, when you've made a great year, back into improving your social benefit. And that's a very fundamentally sort of different model of enterprise. Majority are led by women, huge contrast with the mainstream economy. But what we also found is they're more resilient, not because they're more profitable, but because they persevere through hard times, where a regular business person might say, it's not worth my time to do business in this refugee camp. Things are a bit tough, I'll just fold, I'll sell my assets, and I'll put my money elsewhere. They persist because they exist for the purpose of supporting those communities and producers. And for the vast majority, they're also actively saying, yes, there are times when I will make less profit. I will make less money in order to do more social good. On gender, there's a huge contrast in terms of the leadership of fair trade enterprises. The majority of board positions, CEOs, and senior roles are all held by women. And you can see the figures on the left of the mainstream economy. And these are fairly generous figures. I mean, they come from Grant Thornton, but there are other countries where it's well below, well in the low single digits in terms of women in leadership positions. This is not a requirement of the fair trade model. You don't have to have a woman CEO, but when you set up an enterprise with that kind of model in mind, it just leans towards doing that. It leans towards doing more women's leadership across the board, because the whole fundamental ethos of your enterprise is different. We're seeing a huge increase in upcycling, recycling, innovation. Again, it's not a requirement at the moment to do that. But if you're rooted in your community and you're looking for ways to solve local problems, you might be picking up trash on the beaches of Tanzania, as Chaco does, or you might be picking up the waste from the fast fashion factories in Dhaka in Bangladesh, as Prakriti does, and turn them into new products that create new opportunities for people, because you're there to serve that local community. You see those environmental issues alongside the social issues. We're seeing a rise in sort of organic production, and a lot of this has been happening for years, often not talked about. So this was happening before it was trendy: upcycling, recycling, organic production within the fair trade enterprise community, and that's sort of continuing. We're seeing increases in innovations like plastic recycling, Plastics for Change in India's a fair trade enterprise that's doing this sort of thing. And again, these are happening because these are enterprise models that are able to put social issues and environmental issues often before very short-term profit motives, which allows a whole host of different outcomes to come out. And there's a little bit of a, I think a plethora of those approaches across the board. One thing I would underline is the vast majority of the products that are coming from the World Fair Trade Organization community are handmade artisanal products. That this often means very low CO2 production in production. So handmade garments, often using hand woven products. It's a very different kind of ecological footprint than factories that have mechanized things. And you look at both the people and planet aspects of that, of people who are hand weaving products versus factories. You're creating more jobs, you're creating less environmental footprint, and you're able to often keep alive local indigenous techniques, like in Guatemala and other places where there are very specific ways of weaving that are being kept alive because entire enterprises are there for that purpose. So this is it's a model that I think is unlocking a whole host of other behaviors beyond just what you would expect from fair trade, which is let's treat the people well, to let's solve social issues, environmental issues, keep indigenous skills alive, empower women, put them in leadership positions, all these things that get unlocked as a spin-off of building an enterprise with this ethos. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that all made sense and I didn't run over time. But yeah, very happy to have the follow-up conversation.
Thanks, Erinch. That was brilliant. Right, so next thing is we're going to move to, if you can stop sharing your screen, brilliant.
Yes.
We have our panel of experts. So we've got Tom Wills from Traidcraft Exchange. We've got Dominique Muller from Labour Behind the Label. We've got Marike de Pena, who's from the Banelino Banana Cooperative in the Dominican Republic. So it's daytime there. And we have Sabita Banerji, who is from THIRST. So I'm going to chair the discussion. We've basically got 4 broad questions that we're going to cover for about 10 minutes each. One of the things that I'm going to say is that we're going to have questions at the end. Because there's a lot of us, it's probably easiest if you put your questions in the chat box. And then, because some of them that come to you while we're speaking will be dealt with as we go along. So then if we put your questions in the chat box, I can have a look at the end and see which ones we haven't already dealt with. So we're going to have probably about 15-20 minutes at the end for questions. So the first question that I want to put to everybody, and I think if I can ask Sabita first, because this is probably really relevant to tea. What's the biggest current challenge in your sector? So I'm going to go around the panel, but we'll start with tea. If you can introduce yourself and say who you are first as well.
Thanks very much, Joanna, and thanks, Erinch, for a really inspiring talk, as usual. Yeah, so first is the International Roundtable for Sustainable Tea. And it's a platform that's been created to bring together all the different civil society organisations that are working to try to improve conditions for tea workers around the world. And there are many organisations who are doing some really interesting and valuable stuff, but they tend to all be working sort of separately. And as we all know, if you work together, that you have a much stronger voice. So the idea of THIRST is to bring together those organisations and to try to encourage them to speak out together. And for example, just this week, we've started a call on companies who buy tea from India, from Assam, to support the workers there who have been striking. They've been on strike calling for their wages to be doubled, which sounds rather greedy until you know that their wages are so low that they live in extreme poverty. They are unable to send their children to decent schools. They're unable to get proper healthcare when they fall sick. And that really answers your question about the biggest challenge to the tea industry currently. Well, I say currently, it has been the challenge to the tea industry since the tea industry was created, that the wages are just far too low. And now with the price of tea sort of going down, the demand for tea is getting less as young people are more keen on coffee and things like that. So the problem for tea workers continues, that they have very low wages and they have no way of escaping from this situation. So I'd say that is the biggest challenge for the tea industry, being trapped in that situation.
Thanks, that's great. So Marike, maybe you'd like to pick up on that. Is it similar in bananas, or is it something different, the biggest challenge in the banana sector?
Well, we have a lot of challenges, but I think the biggest is the one we had already 25 years ago, and we still have it. It's about the unfair distribution of value in supply chains. And on top of that, it's now the pressure on prices. No, on the one side, we already achieve a very limited percentage of prices on producer level. On top of that, prices are going down, they're not going up. We are not able to sell everything we do on the fair trade, so even prices outside the fair trade markets are worse. And having said that, the cost of productions are getting higher through climate change, but also the consumers are expecting more from producers on social level, on environmental level, which I think it's the right way to go, but putting that together with prices that are going down, it's simply more cost on producer level and less income. Also, COVID hasn't helped that much. COVID has even increased our cost of productions, and the markets are not paying for this extra cost, and we are putting more people's life at risks, and nobody is really giving value to it. In banana, even worse, because our harvest is weekly. So weekly we put many producers and workers at risk, just trying to serve consumers and make sure bananas are getting on the shelves. No? So what we see is a difficult scenario. Inside fair trade possible as our only solution to stay in business. Smallholders are struggling to stay in business because sustainability is not guaranteed. Young people are not really very happy to step in agriculture. So there is a need for change. Fair trade is like the right recipe to get there. The only thing I think we need to strengthen our collaboration, and this meeting, I'm very happy you invited me, but there is a need to call out for this new economy, make change and get this movement voice out stronger than ever. So yes, we are still have a lot of challenges.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Dominique, garments are a slightly different situation, so could you sort of elaborate a bit more about what the biggest challenges are in the garment sector?
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. To be honest, it's a very different sector, but unfortunately the problems are similar. It's poverty wages and lack of power. Obviously it is, you know, we're talking about manufacturing, which is very different. But it's the industry model, which has essentially for many years allowed a lot of people to profit massively from predominantly young females working to make clothes in production countries. And that is continuing. So, I mean, just looking at Europe, where we have a lot of the major clothing brands. So H&M, you all know, I'm sure, the CEO is Sweden's richest man. In Spain, Zara, the CEO is Spain's richest man. And I could go on with lots of, obviously in England, we've got Philip Green from Topshop. And they have basically profited from a lot of many years of poverty wages, unsafe working conditions. And I think the situation is similar to what Marike mentioned about the trend actually getting worse. So prices are actually going down, even though sometimes the raw materials are going up. COVID has also, I think, really exposed the issue of power. So when COVID hit, well, there were 3 waves, but when COVID hit in the West, what we saw were major brands cancelling billions of orders. So we've actually estimated that there's something around $5 billion are owed to garment workers globally for the months March to June, which is a lot of unpaid wages. And these orders were cancelled unilaterally, regardless of actual legal terms. So it really shows the imbalance of power, the fact that workers really have taken the brunt by actions by the brands, but also in many cases by the governments, which are really, in some cases like Bangladesh or Cambodia, the garment industry is really important. So they have been basically pushing workers back to work, in some cases increasing working times, changing the labour laws, and yet not providing enough security and wages for workers to actually stay safe from COVID. So I think, in terms of the biggest abuse, it's having minimum wages which are less than half of a living wage. In terms of the biggest problem, it is the nature of the industry.
Yeah, it's systemic thing, isn't it?
It is.
So Tom, I know you're not in a specific sector, but can you give us an idea of what the challenges have been in your research? I know you've written quite a lot on the how to change fair and move forward with it.
Yeah, of course. Hi everyone, it's really good to be here, and thanks Joe and the previous speakers for getting us to where we are. So I work for Traidcraft Exchange. Many of you will be familiar with Traidcraft PLC as the one of the pioneers of fair trade in the UK, set up in the northeast of England in the late 70s, and creating a lot of the supply chains that we now associate with fair trade, pioneering coffee, tea, handicrafts, chocolate supply chains, and supporting the development of other fair trade businesses. Traidcraft Exchange, who I work for, is an associated charity that does campaigning and policy work that looks beyond the narrow fair trade supply chains that the PLC was engaged with, and tries to take a broader view at the way that our trading system works, at the way that our businesses work. And one thing that I'd like to kind of bring to the table is to expand a little bit on something that Erinch said, but give a greater slant on the impact and context of COVID-19, and picking up on some of the themes that Dominique introduced. I mean, I think while it seems in extremely poor taste to think of COVID, which has obviously led to a huge amount of death and hardship, as an opportunity, it nonetheless is the case. We've spoken already about the problems with the way that the system is organised, and COVID represents a moment in which there will be far greater than certainly in most people here's lifetime, a new level of government intervention in supporting different industries. And that gives us an opportunity to create something that looks more like the world we want to see. But before going on to that kind of more positive stuff, I mean, I think it's good to reflect on the extent to which the last 6 months have kind of peeled back the skin of the way that mainstream businesses operate. And this is, I thought, Erinch, your slide that really stuck with me and is really powerful was contrasting on one side the profit primacy focused businesses, the brands that we would all recognize as part of the economic mainstream, and then putting on the other side of the slide the organizations that had a kind of greater social or environmental purpose. And we've seen in that mainstream of the economy, for all of the marketing and all of the corporate social responsibility, the stress of COVID has really shown up how the economy works for what it is. And the corporate responses to the pandemic have fitted into a number of different categories. As Dominique said, huge amount of cancellation of contracts in the garment sector. That's been particularly obvious. But closer to home, I remember in March, JD Wetherspoon, the pub chain, making the announcement that when the lockdown was imposed, their suppliers would not be paid. So the people making the beer or the crisps or whatever food, they would not be paid until such a time as the pubs open. So basically, you're using your suppliers as a savings account for 6 months, a year in the future. And a lot of other businesses just refuse to shoulder the kind of financial burden of the pandemic. So you had people from Liverpool Football Club to Victoria Beckham's fashion brands calling on the government for support, for loans, for the furlough scheme. And in both of those cases, actually, that was front page news, and they actually had to step back from that kind of in embarrassment. But it shows that the muscle memory, the first instinct of a lot of these organizations, it isn't to look at the deep pockets of their million and billionaire owners, but rather to look at what kind of other options are available, whether that is on the back of the public purse to support their profits. And then the other thing, which again Dominique has touched on, is how worker safety has been ignored in this pandemic. And Dyson, James Dyson, the kind of inventor, Amazon, Sports Direct, all of these businesses were looking to reopen, and actually a huge pushback from workers, because those workers in the UK, and obviously this is also the case in international supply chains, felt that they were being taken for granted, and actually that rather than being pushed back to work, they wanted more respect to be given to their individual safety. And so that's the kind of muscle memory that we've seen in these organizations. The first response when things get difficult is to fall back on what the state can offer, is to fall back on what their workers can offer, is to fall back on what their suppliers can offer. And that's very much a situation that we want to transform. I'll let the other panelists go in later, but I'm hoping we can talk a little bit as the meeting wears on about solutions. Thanks.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's kind of my next question, but I just wanted to see if Erinch wanted to come back in and have anything to add to what we've already said.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. I think what we're picking up on is that there's a bit of a dichotomy that on the one hand, we want to build this alternative economy. We want to build an economy that is designed to do what we think the planet needs and what people need on it. But on the other hand, our current economy is dominated by the same billionaires and businesses that we've been for decades trying to improve and trying to incentivize and try to pressure to do better, for particularly on social issues from the fair trade movement, but now also on environmental issues. And I think that the big answer to a lot of the questions, that maybe the implicit question underneath a lot of this, is that we need to do both. We need to both be saying, the big companies of this world, yes, they should be buying as many of their ingredients as possible through the fair trade international system. They should be committing as much as possible to living wage. They must be doing as much as possible to make environmental commitments, to make zero carbon commitments. But on the other hand, we know that they are a flawed design. You know, these are corporate models that are that are made by humans for the last century, where there was a scarcity of capital, and said that let's do this based on maximizing returns to financial capital. That's the main goal. That's what we optimize for. And we need to build those alternatives that can rise up and start taking over the economy in coming decades, that can be designed to live within the donut, to prioritize social and environmental issues. And I've seen a lot of questions that come up around, you know, I think how those investments are going to be made, and those are very difficult questions. But the only other thing I would underline is that, you know, we're trying very hard. I mean, all the enterprises, those 350 plus social enterprises in the WFTO community spread around the world, they're trying really hard to survive in an economic climate and an economic system that is not designed for them, that's actually designed to eat them up. You know, a lot of the really mission-led organizations have either been taken over in the mainstream economy, or have been put under a lot of financial pressure in recent years and decades. So what we need is a step up from consumers, from shops, from retailers, to really push those models and say that there is a distinction, because the language is starting to look very similar. If you read Nestle's CSR document, sustainability document, you know, and you didn't have the knowledge that we all have, you'd think that, you know, oh, this is like a cuddly cooperative, you know, that exists to benefit everyone, without thinking about loads of child labor issues and wage issues and inequality issues and all the things that we know are problematic in that particular company, but others as well. So I think we need to do that. And I would encourage everyone to check out WFTO.com, where we have a product search and we have an enterprise search, where we're seeing increasing interest in the web shop search as well, to try to get interest in these organizations, because they're doing some of the most innovative and brilliant products there are around the world. And we really need to just start noticing that and embracing it, promoting it, telling local shop owners, saying, hey, you might want to source from these organizations. Here's a list, here's the website where you can find them, because we need to promote those alternatives. Otherwise, we'll be stuck in a little bit of, you know, we'll be stuck in a bit of a trench, trying to chip away at a mainstream that is designed to kind of resist the change we need.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about encouraging people, not necessarily just pushing a boycott, but giving them alternatives to saying, actually, don't buy Kit Kats, buy these things, because these are better than Kit Kats, and here is why. And that's been the biggest thing for me that's come out of the Nestle campaign on a UK or sort of consumer based position. Obviously, there are other issues for the farmers themselves, and they want to sell as much as they can. But equally, I think, yeah, changing consumer demand is a huge thing. So the next question that we want to be thinking about, and I'm going to come back to Sabita on this, what's the main thing that needs to change in tea for us to be able to be building a fair trade future?
So I was going to say, actually, just following on from what Erinch was saying, and what you also echoed about, you know, consumers asking for change. And I just wanted to assure everybody in this audience that consumers have enormous power. You actually might not realize it, but I used to work for the Ethical Trading Initiative, and we used to have an introductory exercise where we'd ask these people who were members of companies, who were staff in companies who were joining, order of who was the most powerful, and we'd give them a sign saying, you know, you're the CEO, you're a trade union, you're a worker, and every single time, without fail, they always put the consumer as the most powerful person. And the thing is that consumers often don't realize this, so do go into your supermarket, do go into Tesco's and ask why there's hardly any fair trade things on the shelves anymore. You know, do write to your favorite tea company and say you want them to support the tea workers in Assam to earn a decent wage, a living wage. And so, you know, I would really encourage people to do that. But I mean, you asked what's one thing that needs to change. I mean, I think, you know, it's true that actually, ideally, the whole business model of these companies needs to be turned inside out, and you know that is going to take decades. I prefer to believe that that will happen, but it's going to take a while. Somebody on this chat was saying, what will it take to move those profit prioritizing companies over to the mission-led side of the screen? I don't think it's a question of just moving. You know, they would need to actually completely restructure themselves. So in the meantime, probably a cross, you know, probably a mix of companies buying, you know, encouraging your tea company and your supermarkets to buy more fair trade certified tea. And if there were more tea companies that were World Fair Trade Organization members, I wish there were, that I think there's only one or two, but that would be absolutely wonderful, because I know of one or two tea cooperatives where women are more in control, where they do have a fairer share of the price and so on. So you know, until we get to a stage where these tea companies who've been around for 200 years and built on this very exploitative model, until those can be, you know, transformed into World Fair Trade Organization type enterprises, then you know, encouraging people to buy more fair trade, because I think fair trade has gone a little quiet lately. You know, the campaigns that I've been involved in, sometimes trying to encourage people, it's like fair trade is sort of old news, and we need to sort of build a new kind of excitement around it, a new urgency around it, and say that actually, yes, it can help, but we must buy more of it. You know, tea companies are fair trade certified, and they can't sell all their tea on fair trade terms. So sorry, I'll better stop there, otherwise I'll never be able to stop myself.
Yeah, I think maybe Fair Trade Yorkshire's next big campaign is to get Yorkshire tea to become fair trade. That seems to be the way we need to be going with it. So I hope you're all behind me on that one. Right, so yeah, Marike, same sort of question. What's the main thing that needs to change in the banana industry?
Starting with market dynamics.
Yeah.
That we need in all commodities, and this, personally, I believe fair trade is trying to regulate part of it. It's not enough, so we need other kind of regulations to change market dynamics. And maybe the human rights and environmental rights due diligence regulations that are getting into force in Europe from voluntary to mandatory could start to make a difference if we get it right. Honestly, I'm a little bit afraid that now businesses starting to have what you already said, no child labor, no whatever other violations, but it's there because there are now regulations that are mandatory, which is a good thing. The risk I see in this is why are they suddenly, after decades of exploitation, interested in human rights? So it should be on a voluntary basis more than on a mandatory basis, and making it mandatory, my feeling is also that they could push down this responsibility again to producers as being the one that need to solve the problems, while the real problems is generated by others. No, it's because of injustice in supply chain. On the banana side, I have to say we have another struggle also, that is to make sure that smallholders as well as plantations can participate in this supply chain. I think it has been a struggle during decades. Fair trade gave us the opportunity to stay in business, but having said that, with current price pressure and also the lack of understanding of businesses on how smallholders are able to produce bananas as good as big plantations, and taking care of people and the environment at the same or even sometimes better way, it's a challenge, because a banana is a banana, you don't know where it's coming from, no? So there is, at least on consumer level, I think we need to raise more awareness about the environmental impact of smallholder farming, taking care of their natural resources, also the impact on employment generation, the impact on the local economies when smallholder families are active, contributing, consuming in communities, and making development possible at a bigger scale than just on their little farm. So I think we need to get this more balanced debate on, it's not just a banana, it's also bananas that are produced by different actors, and that we need to make sure smallholders are not excluded from this chain. And now the pressure of price is higher, income is getting lower, and climate change, very sadly, is affecting more smallholder farmers than bigger farmers. So this is the banana challenge, and we need to get it right.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Dominique, the same question. What's the main thing that needs to change within the garment sector, do you think?
I thought about this question and I couldn't find one main thing, so I've got three. I think, first of all, I mean, addressing the issue of the industry model, it is, as I think Sabita said, it's going to be a long, hard struggle. The majority of big garment companies are designed to extract profit. So given that we are working sort of in a very different environment to working with smallholders and producers, the key thing that we are working at Labour Behind the Label for is empowering workers. So making sure that the workers in the factories, in the cotton production, in the dyeing and the washing, and including also things like logistics workers, transport workers, they are empowered. They have trade unions. So we work a lot with emerging unions, and especially with women's groups, because a lot of the workers are women. And obviously in a lot of production countries, there are enormous restrictions on freedom of association, on the ability of workers to set up trade unions. So we support the workers to lobby their own governments, and also to organise at the workplace. So only when you have worker voice can you actually have a fair workplace. And then sort of building on what Marike said in terms of sort of the voluntary initiatives, you know, at the moment, a lot of brands have a lot of grand promises about living wage, and also increasingly on environmental issues. So H&M, for example, has the Conscious Collection, Fairtrade Cotton. but the workers' side is generally forgotten because it seems a lot harder. Maybe it's a lot harder to greenwash than being environmentally friendly or so-called. We are pushing a lot for brands to take responsibility throughout their supply chain, which means that they have to move away from voluntary. It has to be mandatory. So we're calling for legislation, mandatory due diligence legislation throughout the supply chain, because at the moment what we have is brands. Again, Marike said this, you know, brands will say, well, we would like to pay a living wage, but our supplier is the bad guy. But then they forget that it's their pricing that is forcing the suppliers to push down wages. So if it is, you know, if there is legislation, then the company has to produce figures around pricing, around what the labor costs are. So when they're sort of making orders, they have to show this. They have to be more transparent. They have to say where they're buying, the names and addresses of factories, wage levels, all that sort of thing. So that's what we want from brands. And in terms of what we want from government, we want proper legislation. So, you know, in the UK, for example, we did this report on boohoo in Leicester factories, and you know, in the media coverage, the government was saying, oh my gosh, this is terrible. But they've been saying that for the past 10 years. And each time a media expose happens, they react, they say this is terrible, we'll take, you know, firm action. And yet they spend very little money on labour enforcement, as do most other countries, very little on inspections, very little on support for workers. And they are loath to put in legislation. So we're continuing to really campaign at the national level, at the EU level, and obviously at the global level on that. So they're the three things. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. So Tom, what I wonder if you can do is start bringing in the third of our questions, which is how is Fairtrade going to help with the problems that we've identified? Because I know that's something that you've sort of thought about, and you know, ways that we can sort of harness the power of fair trade within different sectors to tackle some of these systemic problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'd go back on that to Erinch's original presentation, showing that on one side you have profit primacy, on the other side you have 92% of fair trade enterprises that are investing all of their profits in their social and environmental goals, and that's completely vital. We have in the mainstream business world a situation in which a shareholder, just by virtue of having started with some money, is able to see their pile of money grow year on year with absolutely no work from them. You know, why work for money when you can make your money work for you? And we have to try and break that link. And I believe fair trade enterprises is a real obvious way of doing that. One of the questions in the chat box was to think about or expand on the idea of COVID being an opportunity. And you know, in the first wave of government support with the furlough scheme and with the various different business loans, with the big bailouts that British Airways were given, and with the big tax relief that companies like Tesco were given, it was very clear that the priority, for really good reasons, was to maintain employment and to keep people in jobs. And that needed to happen, and that's fully understood. But as we move months on, and we're continuing to need different types of kind of small business loans and different types of sector support, that does give us an opportunity to, instead of just pushing money into maintaining the status quo, we could be a bit smarter and we could attach some conditions to that. And when Erinch talks about the different ways that a fair trade enterprise is structured, we don't have to say, oh, we want Tesco to become a fair trade enterprise, great though that might be. Instead, we can say, what are the features that we want to be encouraging more businesses to take on? So, you know, the government could very easily say, as a condition of the money that we're giving to you, X business, we want you to put in place a formal policy to limit the amount of money that can be creamed off every year and put into the shareholders' pockets. We're going to have a shareholder dividend limit, and companies like Traidcraft PLC have been doing that for decades. You could equally reform company boards. You could say, as a condition of this public money, you have to have a worker on your board, and that sounds, in this kind of environment, like such a laughably modest solution, but that's a far cry from where we are in most mainstream businesses. So I think that's some conditions to public money is a really obvious place to start, especially as we look forward to the next kind of 6 months of whatever's happening here, and there will continue to be a huge role for the UK Treasury in shaping the kinds of businesses that populate our economy in a year or 2 years' time. And then the other point I wanted to make was just to kind of gently push back on Sabita's point about consumers, because of course, we're all here because we believe that the consumer has power in their choices, in their weekly shop. And I'm sure that the business in Erinch's organisation, they rely for their existence on engaged, conscious consumers. But beyond the engaged people in this call and in other kind of similar forums around the country, people are busy and stressed, and they are poor, and they don't have time necessarily to engage with all of the possibilities. And it seems to me that there shouldn't be a consumer option to buy something from the shelf that has come because of child labour, because of poverty pay, because of modern slavery. That should not be something that's left to me as a consumer to make a decision between. And so that, I would hark back to what Dominique said. We absolutely need laws and regulation to ensure that the stuff that is available for us as consumers does not come at the cost of people and planet. And for that, as valuable as conscious consumerism is to encourage smaller businesses, to encourage different ways of doing things, we have to be campaigning for laws that are going to change the overall system.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. We are, as consumers, powerful, but only up to a point. And then, I've often said that fair traders are the only people who want to abolish themselves, because we don't want there to be such a thing as fair trade, because we want all trade to be fair. We don't want it to be special and separate and different and siloed away. We want what we do, the 10 principles of fair trade, to run through everybody's life. So yeah, fantastic. Erinch, do you have anything to add into that?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say is that now is also a moment to lift our ambition. I think it's on the one hand, we're scrapping and clawing to keep these amazing fair trade enterprises alive at the moment. And we need all of your help. We need all of your solidarity. We need all of your support for those enterprises, and you'll find lots of their products in your local fair trade shops. But at the same time, I think there is a turning point coming in our economic reality, and the average company lives for about 13 years. So in the next 15 to 20 years, we'll have a whole host of new companies that haven't been born yet. We can spend a lot of time trying to, reform the dinosaurs that have currently put us in our predicament. And we do need to work on that. They dominate our economy. Billions of lives are impacted through the economic system that their decisions impact. But at the same time, I think we can be really ambitious and say we're building the alternative here. Like these 20 years ago, Google was nothing, Facebook was nothing. They dominate IT now. There are loads of brands across the consumer goods sector, across retail, that have come up. Amazon has dominated. Imagine if we had the ambition to shape the businesses that are on the up and say, let's build a certain DNA into them, so we don't have to later on rely on the goodwill of consumers or governments being really savvy in having to regulate every aspect of what they do to get them to behave the right way. We can be quite deliberate, and the kinds of mechanisms Tom talked about, I think, are really important in terms of using government levers to do that. But I think in consumer behavior as well, there is an aspect of trying to push today's big brands to do the right thing and reward them for doing the right thing. But also, let's use that consumer pressure to also build the alternative, and to recognize that it's not about just being on the sidelines here. This is an experiment, this is an alternative, this is a proof of concept that we are building. And let's imagine this as the economy that we'll be living in and populating the world with in the next 10 to 15 years. And that's the journey we're on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the fair trade future that we're building. So the final question that I want to sort of think about is, we're obviously, there's about 65 of us on this call. We're all campaigners, we're all supporters, we're all people who really want to be able to help make the world fairer. Starting back with Sabita, what do you think we as campaigners and supporters, what's the best thing that we can do to support the tea workers and the tea farmers and the people in the Sam and elsewhere?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think just to respond to Tom's point, you know, consumers don't just buy things; they also have a voice, and they are also voters. So I completely agree with you, Tom, and with all the other speakers that, you know, it's essential for these kind of changes to be rooted in law, because if you leave it up to being voluntary, it's not going to be sustainable. So I think you know, one of the big things that we can do as consumers is you know, as well as choosing fair trade, we can also speak out. Like I say, actually ask our supermarkets and our tea companies, etc., to behave differently, but also use our vote to vote for parties that are going to support that kind of approach. But also, you know, there is something that we can do to try to, through expressing our demands, we can possibly have influence on other governments. So, for example, with these workers who've been on strike in Assam, 400,000 of them have been on strike, simply asking for a wage level that the Assam government itself had recommended in 2018. And Traidcraft has itself done some fantastic work in supporting this call for this improved wage. But what we're asking now is, we're asking tea companies here to also support that call, to support the Assam tea workers by insisting that the Assam government implements that 2018 level that they recommended. And so, you know, when you're buying tea, you're actually, or when you're buying any product really, whether it's bananas or garments or mobile phones or anything, you are actually making a sort of political statement. But you can also expand that by using your voice and using your vote.
Yeah, absolutely. We are multiple things. We're
I
not
think you're
just
still mute, Joanna.
I don't think so.
Oh, I can hear you now.
You hear me now? Yeah. I think that's the thing. We're all multiple things. So we're not just campaigners. We're not just supporters. We're not just voters. We're not just consumers. We're a whole bundle of different things, and pulling the principles of fair trade through the whole of our lives, and being able to sort of say, well, in this area, this is what I want, and in this area, this is what I want, is really important. So things like moving your bank to a more ethical one, stuff like that. Yeah, really important. Marike, what would you like us as consumers, as campaigners, particularly as campaigners in the UK, to do to support your industry?
We need to keep on advocating for change. That's a way, and because we have been very good on it, and it's a way to link producer reality, to make producer reality more visible for consumers. Maybe in the future, because we are in challenging times, it's also good to get a better link between producers and campaigners, have regular interchanges, make sure realities are well understood, build common strategy on how we can achieve more, but simply work more closer together. I think that's one of how I see that we need to take this forwards, because in a way we are linking, but 30 years ago there was a very strong walking together movement, and I think we need to, if we really want to make a big change in the future, which is very much needed, we need to rebuild this common strength and also build it on producer level, because everything we have gained in Europe and in the United States is still on a very low level in southern countries. And there are opportunities in many of our countries, but our countries don't even know what fair trade means. So there is also a possibility to build like collaboration between civil society movements in the north and in the south, to not just build northern market, but also southern markets. So I think there is an opportunity to work together, working more hand in hand, understanding as campaigners, producer reality, and make a common voice for justice, because we are also about empowerment. Workers and producers, together with civil society, we need to claim justice, to get justice together, and not give it only to campaigners to achieve that. So I think there's an opportunity if we build together the right strategy to do it.
Yeah, that's definitely the way forward, isn't it? It's all about collaboration. It's bringing people together, and we're all working together with a common aim. That's really important. Dominique, what do you think that we can do as sort of fair trade campaigners, but also campaigners for justice in the whole system?
Well, there's been some lovely things spoken already. I think the garment industry, this is where we differ slightly from the sort of traditional fair trade model. And we at Labour Behind the Label, we try very much to not call consumers, but citizens. Because I think brands want to call people consumers and just sort of focus in on them in terms of what they buy or what they don't buy. And there's a huge range of what people can do, even, you know, at a very local level, because, you know, everybody needs clothes. We can't all afford to go and buy beautiful clothes by ethical designers. We should be able to, but we can't. But, you know, every time you buy something, ask the shop assistant nicely, you know, where was it made? Did they get a living wage? They won't know, but it means eventually they will get trained. And I've seen this over the last couple of years in York. So a lot of shop assistants are now being trained, you know, in terms of what the company policies are. There is a lot of campaigning that can be done. A lot of organizations working on the garment industry. There's, you know, I think in the chat there was something around how do we engage with the younger people. You know, I think all of you should go out and get yourself an Instagram and become an influencer. I mean, I'm only part joking, but, you know, we have to obviously use a lot of the social media. And for example, in garments, what is really pushing this very destructive model is fast fashion. And that is young consumers or young people that wear clothes a couple of times and then get rid of it. But there's been a lot of surveys saying that people actually will pay extra for the peace of mind that they know, you know, an item of clothing is not actually made in a sweatshop. And I think we have to remember that and push back on the idea that we can buy cheap clothes and still expect perfect standards. The other thing no one's mentioned so far is investors. So again, looking, for example, at the Boohoo, which is a fast fashion brand in Leicester, in the summer, their share price dropped by half, which was predominantly because investors got scared and because of organizations like Share Action. I don't know if you're aware of them, really pushing their members to say, well, as investors, have you done your due diligence? And most of us, you know, especially us older ones, we will have some investment. We will, fingers crossed, have a pension. You know, you can ask your pension company, where is my money? You can get in contact with groups like Share Action, and really push, because brands, obviously investors, when they drop out, that is hurting brands where it really hurts. So that's another thing to do. You can also, you know, use some of the tools that we've developed within Labour Behind the Label and Clean Clothes campaign. So for example, we've got a fashion checker where before you buy something, you can check how much that brand is paying the workers in the different countries, what promises they've made. And then, you know, it may be a small decision, but you might decide, well, I'm not going to buy, you know, this from, for example, Peacock's or Edinburgh Woolen Mill because of this, but I actually will go to this shop and buy something there. You know, small tweaks that we can all do leading up to the larger things like joining campaigns, signing up for our newsletters and all the other organisations. There is a lot we can do, but I know I want to end on a happy note. There's a lot we can do.
Yeah, it's always good to end on a happy note. Yeah, Tom, what do you think as fair trade campaigners and supporters? What's our role in building this fair trade future that we're looking at?
I mean, I think by being on this call, by engaging with fair trade in your communities, amongst your families, amongst your friends, with the pound in your pocket, already everyone is doing a huge amount, and really should, you know, pat yourselves on the back in terms of the kind of next steps. I've put in the chat the campaigns that Traidcraft are currently running, and please sign up, please support what we're doing, and add your voice and try to make a difference to the way that government and mainstream businesses operate. One specific thing which is coming down the track and which people have mentioned a little bit, and yes, thank you, Dominique, obviously other campaigning organisations are available and I would encourage you to support them too, but the kind of big campaign priority for us and for other organisations that has been mentioned already is the idea that the UK could have a law that would place a duty on companies to prevent human rights abuses in their supply chains. So it would no longer be acceptable to turn a blind eye, or to say, I didn't realise, or to say, oh, I just bought the tea or the clothes or whatever, and I didn't know what was going on there. I didn't know that people were getting paid poverty wages. If we had a law in place that said, actually, you need to show that you've taken adequate steps to check that what you're buying is not the result of a human rights abuse. And if you fail to do that, then we'll fine you, or put you in jail, or we'll dissolve your business. That's entirely possible. And we already have that in place in France in a slightly different form. The Netherlands have a different law. The EU has announced that next April, they will be bringing forward this human rights due diligence law. So watch this space, because that's the next big exciting area for our joint campaigning in the UK to try and clean up international supply chains, and we'd love to have you involved.
Well, it sounds like there's loads that we can be doing. Fantastic. Yeah, Erinch, have you got anything else to add into that? How can fair trade campaigners support what you're trying to do within WFTO?
Sure. One very quick thing that might surprise you actually is not long ago, the World Fair Trade Organization members, we're essentially a big cooperative of all those social enterprises around the world, and they come together and vote on things. They voted to allow Northern Fair Trade to happen. So they allowed for things to be produced in the North with economically marginalized people with disabilities, refugee groups, but also people in marginalized areas which have been left behind. They deserve fair trade as well. They deserve enterprises that are 100% committed to making their lives better and bringing dignity into the workplace. One quick thing I think people maybe on this call could do that's unique is when you see those social enterprises, ask them to join the WFTO. The reason I say that is because of the comment earlier in the chat box about how we are struggling to bring young people sometimes into our movement. But the young social entrepreneurs we need them in the fair trade community. We need their energy, we need their innovation, we need their commitment to environmental issues as much as social issues. This is going to disrupt the concept of fair trade in a very positive way, bring more people's attention to it, and I think allow people to embrace people and planet together. So if you know those sorts of social enterprises in your community who are truly committed to working with people who are disadvantaged in some way, and that's their business model, then we have a system now, a mechanism where they could become a fair trade enterprise, and they can sell fair trade products, and they can help promote our concept, our values, our movement more broadly. So apart from everything else, let's bring in some fresh blood into our movement of those social entrepreneurs that are producing around the world, who are committed to issues in a different way, maybe talking different language and to different audiences than we're used to, and going beyond just the commodities, but into a broader set of products that are potentially more exciting for consumers as more and more interested in upcycling, recycling, zero carbon, etc. So yeah, help grow and diversify our movement by tapping those social entrepreneurs on the shoulder and saying, just check out WFTO.com. All of the process, etc., are all in there. It's a very simple process for any organization that's committed to those values.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, looking at the chat box, quite a lot of the questions that people have already been addressed in some way or other, but one of the ones that haven't was a question from Pam, which was about animal rights. Now I know this sort of links in with because younger people are more likely to be concerned about a whole range of different things, including climate change and also animal rights. And is there, obviously at the moment it's people and planet, that's the big thing, people and planet, and obviously animals are part of planet. Is there any movement within fair trade to look to sort of clarifying a position on animal rights?
Is that to me, Joanna? Yeah, I haven't heard it mentioned as a priority, but we're a democratic organization. So, in fact, there's a question there from Zenon as well on how Principle 10 is going to change around strengthening the requirements around climate change, but also on broader range of ecological footprint issues, which will both be good, I think, commercially as well as for improving the impact. That came from the membership, that came from the grassroots, that came from the ground up. So there's every chance that at the next WFTO annual general meeting, that there would be that sort of a sort of push. At the moment, I haven't heard of it, but it usually happens in a way where I might not hear of that development happening. So I think it's also a very natural thing for the fair trade community to put those issues at the forefront of their businesses that might not be the centerpiece of how they communicate about who they are. But the values certainly are consistent with animal rights in terms of codifying that and making that, a specific high level requirement that would need to come from the membership and the movement in a very organic way.
Right. So yeah, I'm conscious of time. So basically, I'm just going to put it out to the rest of the panel. Is there anything else that you want to say to us now you've got us here as a captive audience? Just to sort of either a big idea or a small idea or something that you just want to say to us that will help us get to this fair trade future that we're trying to build. Dominique.
Yes, it's really just a linking back to what Erinch said about an opportunity, and I think Tom said it as well. It's been an awful experience, and we're obviously all thankful that we're not a garment worker or a tea picker or at the mercy of these huge corporations. But I do think this can be an opportunity in terms of making sure that we don't go back to business as usual. We don't let our government, any government, but especially in the UK, this current government, just pretend it's all over and get us quickly back to shopping without thinking, to going out without thinking. So I think there's an opportunity, and we can see the young people in terms of Black Lives Matter, in terms of LGBTQ activism. The young people are there. We need to get them on board, but I think now is the time to really push. So I just want to send a message of hope. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Sabita, yeah, you had something to say as well.
Yes, I just wanted to say that, you know, whilst fair trade, you know, is a beacon of hope, and you know, we should all be promoting fair trade more, and it definitely does help. I think the other thing people on this call can do is also, you know, be a critical friend to the fair trade movement itself and to fair trade organisation, because there are many fair trade certified tea estates where workers still aren't being paid a living wage and still do not have decent housing and healthcare, etc. So I would say, you know, be an active member of fair trade and push for changes that will really support workers on tea plantations. The colleague from Dominican Republic has talked a lot about smallholders, but there are a lot of fair trade plantations that have a lot of tea plantations that are fair trade certified, which actually, you know, there could be improvements there.
That's great. Right, so we're coming to the end of our session, so it's been brilliant to see everybody. One thing I want you to do now, back in the chat box, I want you to put a word or a phrase or a sentence about what you imagine your fair trade future to look like. So what do you want in 5 years' time? How do you want it to be different? How have you been inspired? What are you going to do to help make it happen? Something like that. Just tell us what you're doing, tell us what you want to do. And then we can all be inspired by each other, and then we can all go and have a cup of tea. So that's fantastic. Lots of engagement, and I hope everyone's been inspired by what they've heard today. We have been in a very interesting place for the last 6 months or so. We've all been sitting at home thinking about things, thinking about the way we want the world to be, thinking about the way the world is, and all the changes that we want to see. And I hope that we're starting to think now that actually what we had last year wasn't something that we want to get back to. We're starting to see that things can be different, and we can have a real sense of belonging to that movement and belonging to the future. So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you particularly to the speakers, to Erinch and Sabita and Marike and Dominique and Tom. It's been amazing to bring everybody together, and I really hope that you've all been inspired, and I hope you've been able to learn from each other about ways that we can all work together in the future. So yeah, I think that's where we're going to be. 5 years' time, we'll come back here and we'll see what we've done, and hopefully we'll be in a completely different place. Oh, maybe we'll still be in Yorkshire. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Joanna.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very much.
Joanna.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Lovely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Lots
you.
to think
Bye.
about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you and congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for organising. It was great.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.